All right, welcome back to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the beat and pour white lightning straight onto your brain. What are we talking about today, Samo?
Well, it is the last day of 2025, so we've got kind of a potpourri. We got a comment from Jason from the last one, which I was intrigued with and had some thoughts on that. We have the latest news, especially, of course, everybody's talking about the daycares in Minnesota and the fraud. We might do a little recap on the year because go back briefly over some of the topics we focused on throughout the year, including our Wheel of Time episodes. So stick around and let's recap the year. Do you want me to start with the comment or?
Yeah, let's start there.
Okay. So this is from Jason 55 Ward. Just in your mind, in quotes. So there's something from our episode on addiction, episode 407, for those that want to take that in and give it a listen. It's only an hour. It's one of our shorter ones. For the years before the scientific method, we basically did a great deal of our engagement with the natural world through rationalism and logos. That's the mind over the situation. I view these as bounded games that constrain entropy whilst allowing for some randomness, but nothing so far outside of the bounds that it will upset you. Controlled chaos. You can also make the argument that you can get addicted to negativity or complaining. Yes. It gives on the front end and takes on the back end. No real value. It helps you constrain entropy by closing off reality. I have thoughts on that because I do think, of course, we have to be careful with verbiage here. There is a difference between bitching and moaning and venting.
Mm.
And so I do think there might be value there, but let's get your thoughts first.
Well, the first thing that pops into my head is this is something that Martha Beck spends a good deal of time on in the first third of her book, Beyond Anxiety, is pointing out one, where these mechanisms come from, and two, they have a utility. Our problem is we've lost the balancing factor. So neuroticism has a benefit in the way we've lived for 298,500 years of our 300,000 year existence as Homo sapien.
Hmm.
Is really until the Renaissance and then the Industrial Revolution. We all basically lived the same unless you were of the elite, right? Unless you were born into the elite. So,
Well, I mean, 200 and something thousand of those 300,000 years, there was no such thing as an elite unless you were just the alpha male that no one could mess with.
yeah, so far as we know in hunter-gatherer societies,
Well, even
it
before then, when we were kind of nomadic.
yeah,
Yeah.
is we're not exactly sure when elite came, and the general consensus has always been elites didn't come along until we formed settled uh, societies,
Mhm.
and stopped being so nomadic. The point being, that is a very, very long time for something to become ingrained. So don't beat yourself up about it. My biggest problem is something Martha Beck spends a lot of time on is, hey, be aware of these things so you know why, and then you know how to balance them. Don't try and destroy them. Don't try and, beat yourself up over them. Don't try and shove them in a closet and lock the door. It's understand the point so that you can balance them the way they're supposed to be properly balanced.
Yeah, and to go even further than that, we look at and Chase Hughes is very good at explaining this in detail. So I'll just give kind of a summary of it and just look him up if you want to. But it's he taught when he's talking about people like Edward Bernays, you know, the thing about Freud that was so revolutionary at the time was he actually went back in time. All these people after the Renaissance and after the Enlightenment were so big on the scientific method, and which is great. I mean, I think scientific method is one of the most the best advancements we've ever had. But he was like, wait a minute, there's something before that though. And the thing about the unconscious that Freud brought forward was, and Bernays expanded. to a level that we're still feeling the ripples of today. Not just ripples, the tsunami of today with social media and advertisement. But what they collaboratively did was say, hey, wait a minute. We have a distinctly very human part of our brain, but that's very young. What Bernays did, the secret to his success was he's like, you know what? I'm going to tap into the mammalian part of the brain, the limbic system. I'm going to tap into that because it's much older and it's more deeply rooted. And that's where propaganda started. That's how he's the father of propaganda. And so when we're talking about what control we have over our body, what control other people have, like as Jason said, controlled entropy, we have to understand that mammalian part of our brain and how it works. Not just it's not just mind over matter as in I can resist that. Sometimes you don't even know that is happening.
This is why I reposted and tagged you in that article talking about the banning of social media in
I mean, I know
Australia.
my weaknesses.
Exactly. But um it ties into something we were listening to over the weekend. Who was that was making the analogy of life as a video game?
That was Chase Hughes.
That was Chase Hughes.
Yeah.
And one of his points was there is no manual and there is no tutorial. There are lots of player made guides to help you along the way, but essentially you learn the game of life by playing the game of life.
Hmm.
Well, that
And
is really
most often it's post hoc rationalization too. That
right.
actually that's not why I put her up there, but Annie Duke's Thinking in Bets.
It,
That's analyzing your life and saying what was random and what was actually something that could have been adjusted for.
and so what do I do next time something similar happens? And to Jason's point, you and I have made this point a lot uh, uh, over our ramblings is that we modern man think we are so much better and smarter because we have more advanced stuff. We aren't actually better and smarter mentally. Our ancestors figured out a lot of stuff just by thinking it through, just by observing and thinking it through. To your point about the scientific method, they used a kind of scientific method before the scientific revolution came along, which was aided in part by technology that helped these techniques. You're with something as basic as a microscope, a magnifying glass, you are able to observe more, and thus you are able to make more accurate analysis. That is why we modern man, we kind of laugh at the Greeks and their humors. And, you've made the point, actually, they were kind of onto something there. They were off on the why and the how, but they were kind of onto something when it comes to what is going on here. And there's analogies you can make with ancient Chinese medicine along the same lines of, yeah, they didn't know why this thing was happening, but they made pretty interesting deductions based on what they observed. And they were able to do that because they were playing the game and they were playing it themselves and they were fully invested in the game because it was literal life or death. Because we have this comfort crisis, and now the various algorithms are making it worse. That to his point about the analogy of life as a video game, well, if you learn by playing the video game, and now you have all these algorithms and these large language models that are, as I said several weeks ago, it's like playing a game with a cheat code turned on. Well, what's the point? How are you going to learn? How are you going to get better? How are you going to figure out strategies to deal with different kinds of problems that arise when you've got a cheat code turned on? When you're just constantly asking Gemini or Grok or whoever, what's the answer here? Okay. And then you nod and you move on. It's idiocracy when he goes to the doctor and the doctor doesn't know how to answer questions. He's just pointing to the screen. Screen say X, so must be X. Why are you asking me questions? You're confusing and frustrating me, you know? And because we're no longer thinking these things through, we are becoming more and more Wally and idiocracy every day.
Hmm. I guess to get to the last point there on the addicted to complaining,
Hmm.
yeah, this is where it's again, language matters here because again, there's a difference between complaining, bitching, and moaning, and the act of venting. And while you were talking, I was looking up to see if there was any literature on it, and there is. But the key here is that there's a big differentiation when we look at psychological or behavior in general, behaviors in general. But when we look at disorders, a lot of times we classify them. You break things down. You do an either or, and then you do an either or within the either or, and then all the way down to the individual. Uh, but one of them is externalizing or internalizing behaviors. And so the great example of this is women are more likely to have internalized behaviors, especially with disorder. Things like anxiety and depression would be internalized disorders because you're ruminating inside your own self. And so when we talk about complaining is or bitching and moaning and all of this, internalizing it would be something like this always happens to me. Oh, I'm a horrible person. This must be because I'm bad or da 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 da. And that's very negative because then you get into ruminating behaviors and you're internalizing the feelings. Venting, on the other hand, is externalizing the internal feelings. So, uh, say you're a working mother and you come home and the husband's, acting like you don't do anything around the house and everything, and then you go to your friend and you vent about it. Well, now you're taking an external event that gave you internal feelings and then you're offloading it to someone else. And so there's two advantages to this. One is very benign and maybe good for the individual, and another could be a little bit nefarious. The first one is cognitive offloading. So have you ever heard when, like, say you're trying to go to bed and you can't get a thought out of your head to get up and write it down?
Hmm.
Because when you write a thought down, you cognitively offload it. So your brain says, oh, it's on that piece of paper. I don't have to remember it for a while. I just have to remember that thought's on that piece of paper. I don't have to remember the actual thought. And we can go into the difference between note taking and this in a second here, but because there is a big differentiation there too. But same thing. If I vent those internal feelings, I can cognitively offload that to someone who's not emotionally involved in the situation, and so they're not gonna pay a price for it unless you're constantly bleeding on them. They're not gonna pay a price for it other than their time, which a good friend will let you do that, or a good therapist will let you do that too. Uh, and you can offload those feelings. Now, whether that actually works or it makes it worse, the literature as I was going through is back and forth according to SciPost. There's some literature that says it does, some literature that says it doesn't. And I bet you if we really looked at those studies, they didn't differentiate between complaining and venting. They didn't differentiate
Hmm.
between internalizing and externalizing. They just probably said, "Oh, talking to a friend or something, talking to a therapist." So I'm going to dig further into that. Maybe we'll have an episode on it if I find like a lot of good stuff on it. But the other part is, and this is the nefarious part, is let me go ahead and share this because this is actually a NIH study here. Venting makes people prefer and preferentially support us over those we vent about.
Hmm.
So we've got a little politics as well. So we may naturally actually have an inclination to do that to improve our social status. Because the more you like me and the less you like other people, the better off I am in that tribe.
Which I feel like once upon a time when we had a healthier overall society and thus healthier overall individuals, we were able to walk this path and stay in between the lines because this is what is meant by the social compact. And when you hear uh people, fellow travelers, on the new right, if you will, talk about the social compact being broken, that's why you'll have, you know, someone, a Bible thumping conservative Christian like Steve Dace talking about the social compact being broken by radical wokeism, and then James Lindsay, uh, atheist academic, you know, capital L liberal, saying the same thing. and pointing to the same examples, even if they might disagree on the how we came to that point. But they're both making the point we used to be able to discuss and debate with each other and then come to an accommodation or agree to disagree and then go to the little league game and then go to church and then go to the moose club or whatever, you
Hmm.
know, and go to the bowling league. We used to be able to do these things as a healthy society, and now, I actually have one of the things I had pulled up. I wasn't sure when I would go here. Is I found this interesting. Let me share. Um,
Uh,
this is I hadn't heard of this guy. Steve Stewart Williams. He does blog Substack stuff, and somebody I follow had shared this comment that he'd made analyzing. Let me start with the actual study here. So this comes from Journal of Behavioral and Experimental Economics from October of 2024, and this was examining from 2019 to 2022, examining effective partisan polarization through a novel behavioral experiment, the equality equivalency test in the United States. That's something you probably understood, but us normal people didn't. Academic mumbo jumbo. So let's just look at the abstract real quick. Existing behavioral studies of effective partisan polarization only capture a subset of decision making preferences and strategies. We apply an innovative experimental design, the equality equivalency test, to investigate a broader range of effective behavior toward partisan others based on data from yearly nationwide surveys between 2019 and 2022 with over 6,000 observations, blah, blah, blah. So it's kind of a meta study because they're using a bunch of different surveys and survey data. But what's important here is the punchline that he Williams here pulled out from a particular graph. And if you're just listening along, it is graph points where they looked at people who identified as extremely liberal, liberal, slightly liberal, moderate, slightly conservative, conservative, extremely conservative. And
yeah,
it,
sorry, I'm so close to the screen. It's very little on my screen, so I might have to get my glasses here. There we go.
blow this up a bit.
Okay, there
Okay.
we go.
So,
Yes, these are the $3 glasses at HEB. Okay.
yep. And then on the bottom here, you have less than high school, some college, and college graduate. And the point is what this shows, quote, prejudice based on political affiliation is now stronger than prejudice based on race, religion, language, or region of origin. Curiously, whereas education is associated with decreased racial prejudice, it's associated with increased political prejudice. And the stronger people's partisan leanings, the bigger the effect. So you see this widening gap, especially between the extremely liberal and the extremely conservative, but all of them, even the baseline liberal, baseline conservative, there's a pretty extreme gap there of um, of political prejudice, and that's another one of these tick marks of here's how things are getting worse. To the point you made is that not only are the algorithms feeding this negativity and helping further break the social compact, but if you go to college, you are being indoctrinated Bernays style into this prejudice
Yeah,
that
and I want to add a layer to this that it makes it very, very it makes some things make sense. Okay, so uh look at media push, propaganda from Hollywood, and I mean basically all media, all media that we're exposed to. So whether you're watching the NFL and the commercials are coming on, or you're watching a newer made TV show or whatever, this is important, and you might see where I'm going with this as soon as I make this statement. There are no natural physical markers to show the tribe whether you're liberal or conservative.
Mm,
There are no natural physical markers. There are only things in how we present ourselves, how we identify and present ourselves. So if you saw a guy walking around in cowboy boots and a hat and some white dude in South Texas, you would probably say he's probably very conservative, right? But you see someone walking around with their blue hair and septum rings, you would probably say she's probably super liberal, right? So we actually the look at the way the culture is going. Watch a commercial. You could be watching a conservative show. Watch a commercial, and how many people have colored hair and crazy piercings and tattoos on their neck, things you couldn't get away with in a job interview back in the day. They're trying to quote unquote use using the technical term normalize all
hmm
of these things so that the people who are in that tribe can still succeed in society and actually wear their uniform. They're wearing their uniform. Remember back in the day in the 80s, Gen X, us Gen Xers out there, all the shows, think of the Ninja Turtles, the punk rockers, the rebels, everybody did that. They didn't want to be part of society.
mm.
But we've made a shift where, oh my gosh, we're indoctrinating all these students that need jobs. We need to change the message that you have to accept me the way I am with my blue hair and septum ring. All right. So it's trying to correct for something that used to be a thing where you wanted to stand up. You wanted to be away from the group. That what did they call the group that Shredder had? The clan?
Yeah.
The clan? Yeah, the clan was all kids on their skateboards with spiked hair and you knew who the rebels were. You knew who the skater dudes were. You knew who even in hip hop culture, they wore things to mark themselves, whether it was the color of the gang they were in, or whether it was the do rag or anything. All these different rebellious cultures had their markers, but now they're trying to change society to where, oh my gosh, you can't judge people for these markers because we need to know that they're on our side, but they still need to live in society. But here's another one in COVID: masks. You knew who was on whose side at some point. After a year or two, if people were still wearing masks, you knew they were watching CNN and
Mhm.
MSNBC, and they were on the liberal to ultra liberal side. And I'm using that term loosely because I hate that we still use liberal there. The left, you knew they were on the left because they're still wearing their mask in their car alone. Right? So we need external markers, and that's a dangerous game.
Well, so that leads me to the other kind of potpourri point here of something that I shared. Again, I don't know who this guy is, but it was an interesting comment, and somebody I follow
Or are we
had
are we
reposted
leaving the
this.
political polarization
Um,
topic? Because I have something from Jonathan Haidt.
this will probably, in ways that some people might not like, is going to segue us into the news out of Minnesota and the Somali daycare fraud.
Okay, well let me bring this up first then. Let me make sure I have the right overview. Okay. So, good work by Jonathan Haidt back in the day, Righteous Mind. It's not a new book, but they looked at political polarization. And if you're just listening, I have a chart here, and they have five kind of vectors of priority in people, and they have it on the x-axis. They have very liberal to very conservative, and on the y-axis they have relevant, not relevant at all, to extremely relevant at the top. And if you see from very liberal all the way on the left on the x-axis, care and fairness are almost at the top. They're very very high. All the others, which the other three are loyalty, authority, and sanctity. Sanctity being, I think he uses the word purity when he gives his speeches,
Mhm.
but sanctity, purity are kind of in the same thing. Uh, like disease control and you, basically, I don't know. There is a little bit of a religious component to it when we talk about most conservatives, but at the same time, purity is the word there. Those are
Yeah,
all at the bottom.
when I've heard him define it, he's kind of melding both kind of
A
the
disgust
physical,
response.
philosophical
Yeah.
and the theological is he's kind of
Mhm.
clumping all of that together and giving it this term.
Yeah. So Loyalty, authority, and sanctity are all on the bottom with the very liberal, which I think the authority would be flipped nowadays.
Mm.
Uh, but so care and fairness are at the top, and then loyalty, authority, and sanctity are all on the bottom at the very liberal. But when you get to all the way to very conservative, those lines merge together. And this is again the rating here is relevant to extremely relevant, relevant to what should be taken care of. And then we've got a second one here, which is very similar. I reject these things and I endorse policies around these things. And this is about
Mhm.
policies about it. And you see kind of the same pattern. Policies around care and fairness are near the top for very liberal, and the other three are at the bottom. And they come together at conservative, and then the loyalty, authority, and sanctity kind of push up further with very conservative, but not by much. It's still all clumped in the same area. So what we see here is when you're looking at the mindset of someone who would consider themselves on the progressive left, I'm going to use the right terms, on the progressive left versus the conservative right. The progressive left highly values care and fairness. And you hear words like equity, right? They want equal results. They want things like socialism. They consider that fair because everybody's getting something, right? Nobody's there's a lessening of the hierarchy financially. Care. I'm bleeding for these people. Oh my gosh, we need to take care of them. We need to let all those immigrants in because they're coming from these third world countries. We can't turn them away. You hear those arguments, right? And kind of steel manned them, right? They're thinking more about the plight of the person than what's actually good for the country, and that actually blinds you to what's actually good for the person too. Go back to our empathy versus compassion episode, right? So empathy being, oh, I feel this and I'm acting. Compassion being, I feel this. Now let me figure out the best way to fix it. So there's a difference there. Loyalty, authority, and sanctity. Who cares? Who cares if people are coming in from a country that might have an infectious disease that we don't have because they lived in the Amazonian rainforest, you
There have
know?
been a lot of stories the last couple of weeks about measles outbreaks in the US, and curiously, they're not saying where these people came from who are
Oh no, they're saying it's
infected.
because we have an anti-vax HHS director. That's why.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. When it's like there's actually a more obvious answer. There's 20
Hmm.
million more obvious data points.
Hmm.
But it's so they push these other things that are used to create structure so far down that the only things that matter are those first two. And so when you're like talking to somebody and you're like, they're not seeing reason. Well, this is their mind. This is how their mind is working, and you have to understand that. So you have to reframe your argument to take care from an empathy point of view to a compassion point of view and say, I am caring for these people, and this is the best way to get it done.
Well, and this is what I think is so insidious about the purposeful destruction of the social compact is because the reason we used to be able to reason together is because we both we implicitly understood that no matter which side of the political aisle you were on, no matter which box you checked when you went into the voting booth, we were all trying to do what was best for America and Americans, or for those of you living outside your country, your people. The same things that we see going on in Britain and the arguments they're having there. We all implicitly understood we were trying to get to the same goal. We just disagreed on the best way to get there. And
Mhm.
so we could say, well, I understand you're concerned about care and fairness, but I think that this policy is not going to achieve that, or will maybe actually have the opposite effect. Let me explain why. No, you're wrong because, and we could go back and forth. Now they've taken the true authoritarians have taken the mask off, and that's why I think was it Kindy? I'm trying to remember which one. The cure for past
That's Kindy, yeah.
yeah, the cure for
The for
past
past
racism.
racism is present racism. The cure for present racism is future racism. Yeah.
Yeah, just taking the mask off and just flat
Which to
out
me is a
saying,
self-own.
yeah,
That last sentence of it is saying that this isn't going to work now because we have to
Yeah.
keep self-correcting
So
down the
so
road.
so what you're saying then is that when,
That
the
statement actually supports the Nick Fuentes of the world because we have present racism,
that's
and now
exactly where I was
he's
going.
trying to create a future racism.
So when those people who are currently being oppressed, the young white men who are that we've talked about when we've talked about Fuentes the past several weeks, the past several episodes, is okay, well, so at some point, say they create a large enough coalition to assume political or even cultural power, because the Kindies of the world don't have political power. They've never been a political majority, but they have had a lot of cultural power, and they have been able to push what they want. So when these disaffected young white men then get that power, you're going to go, oh, well, it's the circle of life. It's now our
Well,
turn to be discriminated against again.
that's a gray area for me because if the politicians bow to you because of your cultural power, you do have political power.
That's a good point. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But the point being is that this is why, back to that that study on political prejudice. That's why the authoritarians want that, because they don't want us to talk to each other. They don't want us to
Mhm.
reason together. They don't want us to live peaceably together if we disagree. Is you can no longer look at those converging graph lines of height and say, well, I see where we differ. I see why we differ. So let's find our common ground. You can't do that, because no, I'm not talking to you at all because you're one of those people.
Well, and add to that that you're going to get on your algorithm the smartest people that you agree with and the dumbest people you disagree with.
Mhm.
So you can say, "Oh, look, see, this guy's making a lot of sense, and I agree with what he's saying." And then you get the other side, and you're getting all the bad stuff. You're getting the rioters in the street, and you're getting
Right.
the people shoplifting, and you're getting this, and you're getting that, and you're like, see, it supports the point. And so that's it's like a reinforcement mechanism. And as Chase Hughes does say, he says your brain's not there to logically deduce the world. It's there to be your defense attorney in your own
Mm.
mind, to support your own biases. So,
All right, so that leads me into what's a seeming tangent that isn't going to be, um, which is this lengthy post from a Christian commentator guy, uh, that made me go, there's an interesting thought, and actually applies to so much of the political discourse right now, even though what he's reacting to is um, somebody commenting on Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey, because the trailer was recently released, like a week or so ago, and people were commenting on it. And some guy commented on all the horrible things that are in The Odyssey. Um, so, oh, why aren't people talking about all these awful things? And this guy says, this guy named W.C. Collier responded, if you ever read Tom Holland's Dominion, in which he makes the case that the pre Christian human mind is so alien to any mind infected by the ideas of Christ as to be wholly unintelligible, which he does by surveying the sheer depth and breadth of ideas which we take for granted and assume are just human, which are in fact uniquely Christian, then you might come away thinking, well, that's a great catalog of all the ways we now irrevocably think like Christians, but where can I find a book that illustrates how they thought, the ancient pagans? I want to see the alien. The answer is simply to do what Holland did. Read those ancient works, read the Greek epics, read the Odyssey, but don't apply your own standards to it. For instance, when the hero rapes a woman, or tortures or mutilates someone helpless and begging for mercy, or kills a small child, as an aside, all of which happen in the Odyssey, the Iliad and the Odyssey. I don't remember which is in which, but yeah, our hero, our titular hero, um, he 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 does some awful things in the Odyssey, and yet he's the hero of the story. He is the great hero of the ancient Greeks. He does some awful things, which is Tom Holland's point in Dominion, which is a book I know of, but I haven't read. Uh, but the Collier is basically summarizing here. All right, back to the post. Um, don't try to figure out why it was actually justified according to your way of thinking. And don't even think about why it needs to be condemned according to your way of thinking. Rather, just sit there and wrap your mind around the fact that no one thought it needed to be justified or condemned when it was written. It was self-evidently to them a heroic act, part of what it means to be a hero. Once you manage this, most of the modern controversies, even over events like October 7th and the Holocaust, will melt away. You will realize there isn't any trouble in believing a man raped a girl with a nail gun until she died and then called his grandma to brag about it. That happened. Nor that Germany and Russia created entire industrial systems of labor camps, which had as their objective to ensure that no laborer survived the labor. That also happened. If you wonder how one country, Germany, could field such a large army to fight off three world powers in Great Britain, Russia, and the United States, it's because their economy was run by slave labor. I've mentioned before the World War II channel and their War Against Humanity series. That's something they cover in that part of it when they're covering World War II is the way their economy was shifted to a slave labor economy, and the workers were purposefully worked to death. It was their German way of being efficient. Okay. And entire industrial systems to dispose of the bodies as the laborers died, or that Saladin's biographer boasts because it was a point of pride and honor for Saladin about, quote, miserly women forced to yield themselves, and women who had been kept hidden, nuns, stripped of their modesty, and free women occupied, meaning penetrated, and precious ones used for hard work, and pretty things put to the test, and virgins dishonored, and proud women deflowered, and happy ones made to weep, end quote. It will not be hard to imagine these things done. It will be easy to believe the stories of the Holocaust and all the rest because you will come to understand by reading pre Christian heroic stories that all of this is just normal human behavior. It's what you would do, would proudly participate in, but you happen to have been born in a Christian land in a Christian time, even if you yourself are not Christian. And where lands become unchristian, nature heals. Human beings return to what they naturally are, the kind of thing that considers this behavior not horrific, but heroic and to be lauded. When you read that, and if you think that's hyperbole, think about the studies, or the surveys we have brought up uh, before and after Charlie Kirk's death with the radical left justifying political violence and political assassination. Not a majority yet, but a clear plurality and a disturbing number of your fellow citizens who think, yeah, political violence is justified because these people are awful. What is that but a pre-civilized civilization, a might makes right civilization? What Collier was relating there, what Holland writes about in his book Dominion, is that basically what sums up almost all of human history, except for this very tiny window of what we call Western civilization, modern Western civilization, is might makes right. That's why it matters that BLM, CRT, all of these various movements spring forth from Marxist movements because all Marx is a regressive return to might makes right. He just wants to flip who has the might. It is no longer the elites, which were the aristocrats and then the bankers, landowners, capital owners. No, it is us workers. There are more of us, and if we band together, then and I say us, Marx was an elite himself, but if we band together, then we can turn this on its head, and now we have the authority, we have the power. It's just might makes right.
Hmm.
but
Well, they
dressed
sell it
up.
in everybody's going to be equal, but
Mhm.
not everybody's going to be equal. Let's look at Leninist and then Stalinist Soviet Union. Stalin would call his secretary in to just shoot somebody. Is that person equal to everybody else? No. His captains were not equal to the people under them. There is no true equality. There will
Mhm.
always be hierarchy. It's how do you want it to look?
Yep.
Now, I will say he kept saying Christian society, Christian society, Christian society. I'm going to use the word Western because Christianity itself benefited from the Enlightenment. Because you want to talk about all those stories you told about Greeks and Romans and Saladin and all that. Let's go back to feudal Europe. Everybody talks about chivalry and they say, oh, chivalry's died when we're talking about dealings between men and women. Yeah, if you were still with your flower maiden, you could cross the country without being touched. But if you were another knight's wife, you were raped. So it still happened. It still happened. The Enlightenment Western values propelled everything forward, probably with the help of caffeine, but it propelled everything forward, and that it a rising rising tide lifts all ships, right? And so yeah, there are problems with it, and there are problems if you put parts of it in a bubble, like Jason said earlier with the scientific method, where you detach yourself from our natural connection with nature. So there are problems with it, but it did rise all ships.
Well, I would contend
And
that
some cultures rejected it. And that's
the
where we get in
yeah,
the problem of it.
but the Enlightenment was possible because of that Christian foundation. And the reason the Enlightenment happened was because of Gutenberg. Because basically, what I contend is that the printing press allowed, because these ideas were already there. If you go to, like, well, you have somewhere up on their shelf,
Mhm.
you have Augustine. These were people that were writing. I think both of them lived and wrote before the year 1000. I think I think Augustine was 600 something and Aquinas was 800 something, or other way around. Anyway, point being, these people were out there, but they were in very small bubbles
Mhm.
until the printing press came along.
Yeah, and it's this is kind of on both sides of the issue. Socrates, we would consider him an Enlightenment thinker, even though he was 2,000, 1,000 years
Mm-hmm.
before, 1,500 years before it. Uh, but on the flip side, he spoke out against the written word because he thought it was going to create an environment where people stopped having to think because you could just read it. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and he was afraid everybody was going to be subject to a few people's thoughts with the written
Yeah.
word instead of having to think things out for themselves. So,
But wherever you think the root of these ideas came from, the important point here is to understand they're abnormal in the history of the human world.
mhm.
They are the exception, not the rule. And we have become so comfortable, and you have the comfort crisis and war on the West up there because,
Well, I should also have weirdest people on the planet too.
yeah, but we have lived for so long under these ideas that way too many of us in the West think this is the way the world works. It's not. And this is a point that has been being made. If you follow Carl Benjamin, who on YouTube is Sargon of Akkad, or was until he got banned and then made a channel under his own name, which got even bigger. Anywho, but one of the points that is being made in Britain right now with all the tumult there and all the scandals there is that multiculturalism has failed. Of course, it's failed. It was always going to fail. It was also always very racist. This is an idea that's been kicking around in my head and is now front and center with not just the Somali fraud rings in Minnesota, but the reaction to them. Because the reaction to them is what is interesting to me, and what connects back to that point about political prejudice of the facts of what is happening on the ground in Minnesota is entirely irrelevant to the woke left, who are just pointing at you and saying, you're a racist for even bringing it up. What are you talking about? There is legitimate large scale, to the tune of perhaps billions of dollars of fraud here this is a bipartisan issue, but no, it's not, because that's not the world we live in anymore. We live in a very tribal might makes right. We have regressed. Too many of us have regressed into this tribal might makes right, us versus them idea on purpose. And that reaction is also wrapped up in this idea of multiculturalism. The reason multiculturalism was always bound to fail is one, because cultures are different. And when people think about multiculturalism in the West, what I think we think about is that, you know, the Italian immigrants into New York City gave us Italian American cuisine, and so now we have pizza restaurants everywhere in America. Okay,
Mhm.
that's the veneer, that is the trappings of culture. The reason multiculturalism, quote unquote, worked in America for a time is because all of these cultures were Western. They were just different flavors of Central and Western Europe, and a little bit of Eastern Europe when you get, some of the Polish immigrants that came in the later 1800s. So, but most of these come from that same foundation that Collier was talking about there, with this Christian Enlightenment way of thinking and living. Well, now you're importing massive numbers of people who are very different. And this is where I also say the idea popped into my head of multiculturalism is inherently racist, because they say culture, but what they mean is ethnic.
Hmm.
They mean multi-ethnic when they say multicultural. And so what they're doing is they're putting a color chart next to your skin and seeing how much melanin you have and saying you're this culture. That is definitional racism.
Yeah, I've got two major thoughts to go through here, and one is on the political, and one is on what you're talking about, the cultural. Because again, I deal in complex systems, and that's where I fit most comfortably. Whether it's your body, whether it's your psychology, whether it's sociology, they're all complex systems. And I always revert back to Nassim Taleb, where his idea of expansion, he is very pro expanding your mind, expanding your skill set, becoming diverse. He's an economics guy, so he's talking portfolios and all of these things, and economics in general, whether it's your country's macroeconomic structure, where hey, we need to be self-sustainable, but we also depend on other countries, or your own personal stocks and bonds and everything. But I do that. That's the way my fitness program works. But what the style is isn't just go do everything and bring everything in. The style is develop a base that's like a circle of all the things that matter. And they're all in their different points of the circle, and develop a base where you can get those all into a stable, sustainable system, and then tinker at the edges. And so you brought up the Italians and pizza. We brought in a whole culture of people that had their own government, that had their own this, and they were obviously at that point in time they were running from it. So that's, that helps because they're kind of thankful to be here at that point. But they also assimilate into American culture and then put in little tinkering bits of their culture, their food. So if we were talking about the Somalis and everybody's going, "Oh, their food is disgusting," I'd be like, "Yeah, you're racist. Just don't eat it. Shut up." But we're talking wanting to introduce Sharia law. That's not tinkering at the edges. That's trying to turn the system over on its head. So we have what we call American culture, American society, American government, the Constitution. That's that circle in the middle that was a solid object that now we can start tinkering at the edges with, oh, hey, they have a way of making shoes, or they have a way of doing this, they have a way of doing that. That's actually very useful, and that's going to diversify our economy. Oh, people like this food. Let's That's going to grow the economy. If you start bringing those up, that's going to help these people assimilate because now they can make money and pay their taxes and pay their rent and all of that. So that's the model I look at there. So that was where my thoughts first went when you talked about food and stuff. That's not what we're doing there.
Exactly.
Now, the other part of it is they always say don't attribute to malice what can be attributed to incompetence. I hate that saying
Mhm.
because I don't think it's an accident that all of these fraudulent daycares are Somali. They could have picked anybody who wanted to be crooked. which is every culture. This is the racist part of it, right? They, there would be plenty of white people that would have been like, you mean I don't got to do nothing? I can make millions of dollars, right? There could have been plenty of black people, plenty of Hispanic people, plenty of this, plenty of that. They picked one group of people because now when you attack it, they say, oh, you're racist. If it was everybody doing it, everybody who was crooked, they wouldn't have that defense. They wouldn't have that mott to go back into. They would be constantly in the Bailey.
Well,
Or did I get that backwards? They would be constantly in the mott.
yes, mod
Yeah,
is the
yeah, yeah,
outside.
yeah.
Um, as I was scrolling through seeing what's going on this morning, um Elon Musk had reposted something from a year or two ago that he wait, what year is it? No, it would have been last year, or early this year, actually. No, yeah,
Well,
early this year.
the point of that statement, by the way, just to clarify, so in case we get clipped, that actually is less racist because
Mhm.
I'm not saying Somalis are crooked. I'm saying the people who are using them are.
Musk's point was is he reposted a post he had made earlier this year from it's crazy to think that it's just the first year of the Trump administration, but Doge, remember that was early this year in the winter spring of this year when they got going, and one of the things they revealed was rampant fraud through the various COVID schemes and programs. Including one of the points he made was, hey, can we, if we're going to have rampant fraud, can we at least keep it in our own country? Because they found, close to 300 million in COVID fraud that were payments to foreign entities. And he's like, hey, can we at least keep our fraud? So, hey, at least Minnesota kept its fraud in house. So the money didn't leave the country. Yay.
Well, we don't know how much is
Yeah.
going back to the home country of the perpetrators.
But where the culture comes into it though is you brought up the point of these aren't people who are um willing and wanting to assimilate into American culture. They want an enclave of their old culture. Well, what makes the third world and why it can't ever get out, and people like Brian McWhorter and numerous others have written on this, like specifically talking about Africa. So I think this was McWhorter in one of his books is where I think I got this. There's there's this joke that is an old joke that everyone goes haha at because they've all heard it when it gets repeated, which is to illustrate why Africa is the way it is. And the joke goes, an African man and a man from Southeast Asia both go to school in America and become friends. And then they go back to their home countries. And the African man goes to several years later, goes to visit his Asian friends, and he's got this nice big house. He's got two cars, he's living the life, and he asks him, man, how did you get all this, so quickly? And he says, come here, friend. And he takes him to his balcony and he points out, you see that highway out there? And he says, yeah. He says, and he gestures around to his big house and says, 10%. Because the graft is just accepted in some parts of the world, and you're gonna take your 10% cut, for yourself. And he goes, oh wow, okay. So the African man goes back home. A few years later, the Asian man comes and visits, and he has this palatial compound and armed guards and multiple wives and all the stuff, all the trappings of an African warlord. And he goes, how did you get all this so fast? He says, come here. He takes him out to his balcony. He points out, you see that highway out there? And the Asian man goes, no, what highway? And he gestures around and says, 100%. And so for all of you who just canceled us for being racist, McWhorter's a black guy, by the way. That's one of the things he talked about in his book, Coming to Africa, I think it was, is you have to let them make sure they know that you're an American if you're a black person working and living in Africa because they're super racist.
Mm.
And so he had a colleague who was McWhorter is lighter skinned, which is better, quote unquote, to a lot of African cultures. He had a colleague who was much darker skinned, and he had to have his passport on him at all times because he would get harassed, threatened. He's like, no, 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 I'm not one of them. I'm that tribe you don't like. I'm American. I'm American. See, passport. So Um, this was understood that this is why Africa stays third world, is even amongst people. His point was even people who don't like it because of their political inclinations understand that this is what happens, is that it is a plunder society. This is where I'm socking back to the Somali fraud, is the reason every election erupts in violence is because it's literal life or death. Because with every election, once you attain power, you use it to take from your opponents and give to your allies. What is happening here is that they are plundering the resources to give to their people. That is the mentality of the third world, is you use the government to legally, justifiably take. You don't make, you don't create, you plunder. That is what is happening here. They are just using our systems to do it.
Hmm.
And to your point about the people who are facilitating this, is where the heck are the trials? Because you can't tell me that a lot of these people who don't even seem to speak English, you can't tell me they figured out themselves how to navigate these very complex systems and bureaucracies in order to perpetuate this amount of fraud.
Yeah, and to answer the question of why are we seeing it more on one side than the other? Because you could say, oh, because Trump's in charge and that's what's being exposed because he's got a bias. But we were seeing it during the Biden administration. And if you really have a very honest hindsight, you could see it in the Obama administration in spades, right? So it's let's go back to that chart. I was mulling over that authority line because I was like, well, maybe that would change. No, because if you define authority as rule of law, then yes, that chart makes complete sense because means to end, care and equity are the top two. Anything that I have to do to get those two things done, that rule of law doesn't matter. And my people are here, and I need them to come up in this world and take over this area of this world. Who cares what the law is? Who cares? I mean, we're gonna try to look like we're going by the law, but at the same time, we're gonna skirt it as much as possible. So that value set determines the action. And so that's why you see it more on the left side of the aisle than you do on the other side. The right side has its problems, but at least they try to follow the law in the process. They may try to change the laws. They may try to take an authoritarian bend and say, well, you can't do this, we can do that kind of thing. But they're less likely to go under the table with it.
And this is,
Unless you're Mitch McConnell, then
oh, jeez.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, that was my point about the reaction to it is so telling, is the the defense of it from the woke left has been the fairness and the equity of, well, these are poor people, these are refugees. And this infuriates me because no, they're not. That Trump got a lot of pushback, and this is where Trump is so frustrating because he made a good point. He just made it in a terrible way. This was his S-hole countries comment in his the first administration. These are just people fleeing crap holes. They aren't actual refugees. No, a refugee is, let's stay in Somalia. I just brain farted on her name. Neil Ferguson's wife, Ayaan Hirsi Ali. Um, that is a refugee. That is someone who has had people say, we are going to kill you for speaking out against us. And she continues to speak out. And she continues to need private security because there are people who want to kill her for criticizing them. That's a refugee. A refugee would be like, hypothetically speaking, say some large country somewhere started a war with a smaller country and someone spoke out against that war. That person's going to be in trouble.
Hmm.
That person is going to have to flee. Um,
A refugee would be someone from the Wuhan lab wanting to spill the beans and got over here. There was somebody that tried and he got disappeared before he could
mhm.
make it out of the country. So,
That was one of the first clues that, wait, what's going on here? Was this doctor who had managed to get a video out saying, I am currently dying with something. Here's what is going on here. And that guy disappeared, and China tried to make the video disappear, but it was already out there. Speaking of disappear, another one recently, I don't remember his name, but a long-time political prisoner, a democracy advocate in Hong Kong, who had been fighting the losing battle of trying to make communist China honor its agreement to allow Hong Kong's British style democratic system to continue to exist. And he was thrown in prison for it. And he recently died, quote unquote. Maybe it was natural causes, but I'm dubious. In
well,
prison.
I mean,
That's a refugee.
if you don't feed somebody for 3 weeks, that could be natural causes.
Starvation is natural.
Yeah.
I don't know
Or
about that.
have horrible living conditions and he died of dysentery, Oregon
Exactly.
Trail style, you know.
Yeah. Those are refugees. People who are just coming to the West because we have nice stuff and they can get in on the nice stuff. That's not a refugee. And the treating them all the same, it's as infuriating to me as when I yelled at the left in the early days of Trump saying, "Stop calling everyone on the right Nazis." Not only is it not true, it is an insult to everyone who actually had to live under that regime. It is an insult to everyone who, to Collier's point about the, you know, labor camps designed to kill you. Okay. That's what that regime was like. Stop insulting those people by saying that you're fighting Nazis. You're not. You're dingleberry. It's not the same. You can criticize your opposition to say you are going to become this if you stay on this road. That's a different point. But conflating these ideas is infuriating to me. Words are supposed to mean things. And because if they don't, then again, back to the we cannot come and reason together if we're talking different languages. And that was part of the point of equity is we are going to put this term out here and make it sound like we mean equality, which everyone loves, but that's not what we mean. Equity meant something different, and the obfuscation there was purposeful. Just like all of these tens of millions of people that have been let in the past years, they're not refugees, but we're going to call them refugees, and we're going to let them go through this process, and we're going to give them temporary protected status and all these other things because of care and fairness. Back to Height's point there, and that chart is we want to, well, and you brought up Bernays earlier. We want to short circuit your critical thinking systems and just make you have the feels,
Hmm.
and then target you on anyone who criticizes this policy to say, oh, you hate the people. No, no, I'm criticizing the policy. I may be dubious about the people. I may not like the people, but what I'm criticizing here is the policy. Well, doesn't matter. You're still a racist.
All right. Well, on that note, we're going to take a quick bathroom break, which will be about 2 seconds for you listening, and we'll be right back. All right. As I said, a little hiccup there, 2 seconds for you, a few minutes for us to do what we need to do. Okay. So now we're going to kind of segue that into our wrap up of the year. Uh, and as we were just talking about with the politics, with the Somali thing, with the culture, with the things that make up why you end up on the spectrum of where you are in politics. Uh, One of the themes we've had for almost this whole year, you brought up Martha Beck's work earlier, but we kind of led into that with the work of Ian McGilchrist and right brain, left brain thinking. And one of the keys was rigid thinking. And we spent most of the year on that, and we took it from everywhere from relationships to politics. So, what would you think would be the biggest aha highlight moment from all that through this last year discussing that topic?
For me, I think just overall is a cautious optimism that is unfortunately starting to fade, and my natural cynicism is starting to come back in because I mentioned I brought up Doge earlier, and initially the first few months of the Trump administration, it looked like the work Doge was doing might actually lead to some, the woke left likes to use the word systemic. Well, there's some systemic problems in the government, the federal government, because precisely because it has become so big. It has made it easy for things like the COVID scams, the what we're finding it not just the in Minnesota, these daycare scams, but now there are other journalists in, I think it was Washington State, that I was seeing were going around doing the same thing that this guy who had done a lot to expose what's going on in Minnesota. There are some people doing it in Washington now of a similar types of scams. Well, when you have a multi-trillion dollar budget, there's no way to keep track of all that. People have a hard time wrapping their head around how big 1 trillion is. It's a
Yeah,
ludicrous number.
especially since the budget is like 6,000 pages of documents.
Hmm. So that makes it, I don't remember who I first heard say this, but complexity is a subsidy. Normal people, the more complex you make a system, the more difficult it is for individuals, especially just normal Joes, to work within that system, let alone take advantage of that system. So this is why you see, you know, what we were talking about it when it was happening of Facebook saying, "Oh, we're very concerned about what's going on here. We're going to help come up with the, policies and legislation to address this." Are you really? Are you really trying to help, or do you know that you are so big and so wealthy and so powerful that you can help craft the legislation so that you shut the door behind you and you're fine, but no competitor is ever able to challenge you,
Hmm.
right? Industries do this all the time.
That's
Of
why we have monopoly laws, right? It's
exactly, but we have these antitrust laws, but the 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 bigger and more complicated the system, it means the bigger players are able to have the resources to take advantage of it. And this is where I'm cautiously optimistic that we're kind of bookending the year here. We started with Doge exposing all kinds of similar types of things, and then Doge kind of went away in the middle of the year, and now that concept is back with what is being revealed in the fraud in Minnesota. So maybe this actually means not only for our children and grandchildren do we need the fiscal responsibility, because the laws of reaping and sowing, the laws of supply and demand, the laws of monetary policy are undefeated. And you will be Zimbabwe, or you will be the Weimar Republic, or you will be something if you continue on this unhinged teenage girl with daddy's
Venezuela.
credit cards. Yeah, yeah. So the fiscal policy side of it, we absolutely need to reduce the bloat of the federal government, or our children and grandchildren are going to pay for it, and it's going to be rough.
Hmm.
But then also, just as a matter of justice, the people involved in these things need to face criminal prosecution. And we haven't seen a lot of that. That has been my kind of unending rant of the year, and why I think Bondi is absolutely the most disappointing appointment by President Trump. What the hell have you done? You have been in office for a year almost. What have you done? What major investigations have you opened? What indictments have come down? And really, the Comey trial is the only thing I can think of a major figure who is facing any kind of consequences for the things they did. And what he did wasn't good, but it pales in comparison to what so many others did under the first Trump administration and the Biden administration. And nobody is being held to account. Our elites are still elite. So will this kind of microcosm of the fraud, is this contained enough that you will actually get consequences? And I mean serious consequences. Things like by reporting by investigative journalists, which again is back to Pam Bondi, where are you? Not from anything the FBI or federal government or Justice Department has done, but due to pretty exhaustive reporting by a number of outlets, Ilhan Omar should be denaturalized, have her citizenship revoked, and she should be deported back to Somalia for immigration fraud, let alone whatever hand she had in the fraud that's going on now that has
Hmm.
been reported about her net worth exploding over the past couple of years. So,
Well, which is why politics ruins everything because she's sitting behind the protective barrier of you're just prosecuting your political opponents.
yep.
Yeah.
Well, that is my cautious optimism is where we started with Doge and where we're ending with this revelation is maybe something will actually happen next year.
Yeah. Okay, so Saki that back to rigid thinking and left and right brain. Uh, I don't know.
I'm I feel like the the only way consequences will be reached is if enough people break the cycle of rigid thinking that we were talking about to begin with this political prejudice and say knock it off would stop pointing
Okay,
and saying
yeah.
everyone who disagrees with you is a racist. Let's look at this one issue right here. This okay. I can't remember who I saw make this point, but someone made a really good point this morning about the Somali daycare fraud. Is he said the the reaction to this by the woke left is bizarre because some of them are claiming, you know, if they're not just saying this is racist, they're saying, well, this isn't proven. This is much ado about nothing. This is, and this guy made the point that you look at the videos of this. I can't remember Shirley. I think his name is like Mike Shirley, something like that. The independent journalist who was going around doing video of trying knocking on doors and saying, hey, when are you open? How many kids do you have? Tell me about your facility, because so many of these look like no-show scams of they set themselves up as a daycare. They were getting all this federal money in subsidies and they didn't have any actual children. And this guy was making the point that you realize that if this isn't a pure scam, that that's not any better when you look at these facilities of hold on, you're getting all of this federal money in subsidies and your place is a dump. Do you really want kids going there? What are the criteria, or what are the education, the certification, the experience of the staff? What is the quality of the facilities of this? Is a scandal either way you cut it.
Well, and to take this to a level with the politicians is this is a top-down thing. This is not a bottom-up thing with the quote unquote owners of the daycare because I went ahead and looked it up because I know we have laws here in Texas. I wanted to make sure I had Minnesota right. They're subject to minimum one unannounced inspection per
Mm,
year by the state. And how long has this been going on? That means someone is rigging the inspections. Someone somewhere is rigging the inspections. And there are instances where you can have more frequent inspections too, but it's unannounced. It's at least once a year, and this has been going on for years. So someone is rigging the inspection. Someone on the inside is allowing this to happen. Either that or they're just putting an envelope of cash in the inspector's hands. One of the two, which is still someone on the inside and someone who needs to be fired from their job.
fired at a minimum, criminally prosecuted if
Yeah.
applicable. Yeah,
Yeah. So
that's I
so
didn't even think about that, but that's a good point because this is a fairly heavily regulated industry because
as it
you're talking
should be
about
because you're children.
the protection of children. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, let me just the that stood out to me because I was like in Texas, I think it's twice a year here. I think it's very frequently. And so I was like, it has to be some system. There has to be, and which means the system is being bypassed, which means somebody on the inside is allowing that to happen because paperwork's done somewhere. I would like to see that should be public record. I'm gonna look now. That should be public record, the reports on these places.
Well, that's how the journalists get on this trail is because a lot of this is public record, and there is after the journalists in Washington State started, it was Washington State because I remember now one of the reactions to this is that a Washington State legislator is pushing through a bill that would make all of this information secret so that independent investigators couldn't do what they did in Minnesota to
No,
expose all this fraud.
that should be the biggest one rule on government. You're not allowed to make things secret.
Boy, talk about a red flag.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah.
wow, it's are we the baddies? Yeah, yeah, you are. And this should be an issue where you should be able to talk with your friends and family and say, look, rigid mental thinking, stop it. Look at this issue right here. This should be a bipartisan issue, and it's not. Why?
Well, I
Whose
mean,
fault is
yeah,
that?
let's pull this to the non-political in a relationship. Talk to somebody about their partner, their new partner that has all these red flags. What do? They stop talking to you.
Mm.
I mean, that's the natural response because they don't care about the red flags because they have this thing in their head that is making them ignore them. Relationships, we talked addiction last time. I was thinking about this earlier. The romantic part of the eros part of relationships is like the opposite of addiction. Addiction is something you do, you kind of like, it grows on you, and then you become dependent on it. Relationship is like you become dependent on it on the onset, and then it fades. It's kind of weird like that. I don't know what the mechanisms are behind that, but it's funny. It just cracked me up. Okay, so on my end with the ahas from the talks we've had on rigid mental thinking and left brain, right brain, and I go back to McGilchrist. I haven't read Beck's work. I've heard her talk, but I haven't read her work. Is actually functional aging because what we know from literature is diversity of experience is actually healthy for functional aging, but you can't have diversity of experience if you have a closed mind
Hmm.
because you not only are you not accepting of new information, but you're not even looking for it. You're the left brain thinks it has the answer already. It's already grasped the concept, as McGilchrist would say. It has grabbed it, which is why most right-handed people are severely left-brained because the right hand is made for grabbing and controlling. And we need that to some degree, but you cannot have a diversity of experience without having an open mind. So if you are a very, if you can identify this within yourself, if you're kind of a closed-minded person, if you're very rigid, if you're very type A, get the book Heath's reading and do the drills. Try it. I mean, give it a shot, or at least just try to do something different every once in a while. Maybe, see if you enjoy it. Now, you might not enjoy it just because of your mental state. That's where the drills come in, right? So that was my biggest thing is I'm trying to live the longest, healthiest life I can, but I'm actually more focused on health span than lifespan. And I think that diversity of experience is very important. And I look at it again like economics or diversifying your portfolio is a good thing. And so diversifying your life is also a good thing because we use a word, we got getting stuck in a rut. And what's one of the things when you're talking to somebody? I did this with one of my clients the other day. He's 64, and I was like, "Oh, we're about to have to get used to writing 2026 on our things when we were doing his sign in for his personal training." And he's like, "Yep, flying by as every year." One of the brain is a time machine. One of the tenets of that is the more uh, uniform, the more routine your life is, the faster time goes. The more diverse your life is, it slows it down.
Mm.
So I'm trying to really branch out. Of course, you don't sacrifice your responsibilities in doing so. This isn't YOLO. This isn't just, oh, you only live once, so I'm going to throw everything out the window. But try to tinker at the edges. Okay, hey, maybe, I didn't do that one thing that I could have done because it was on a weekend. I didn't have to work anyways, or, we've been fishing. We had to take a break because of school, but, the last 2 years, we probably fished more than we did in the 4 years before that. It's the old live like you're dying, right? And then, just go to someplace new or eat some new food. Don't be a chicken nugget queen, eat some new food every once in a while. We talked about this at lunch with you and your wife the other day. I'll try anything because I want to experience it. I might not like it, but I want to experience it just to say I did. So yeah, that's what I think people need to open their mind more, and I think I could take that lesson to myself too. Even though I'm typically an open-minded person, I need to actually make the effort to put myself in the situations to open my mind a little bit more. So that's what I took from that.
Well, that's why I we kept saying we were going to find something else, and then we kept finding new things to talk about with Wheel of Time.
Hmm.
And one of the things I appreciate with those discussions is, you know, with something like that, you think it is a specific way. You think, oh, this happened because of this, or this character is like this. And then somebody else goes, no, I don't think so because, and you go, huh. Even if you don't agree, it's an interesting train of thought. It's an interesting thought exercise. We have that term for a reason because the brain also needs exercise. So, for instance, talking to my son had a busy semester, um, but he's only taking one class this semester to finish up, and he'll get back to reading. So he's been stuck at the beginning of Winter's Heart for a while, and I find it very interesting. I don't agree with him, but I find it very interesting that still, because I kind of teased this before to see. I said I was going to keep track and see if he changed his mind. He still doesn't think the slog is a slog. He actually likes it.
Teach their own. Well, this is a great thing about opinions is you're allowed to have them.
Mhm. And it's because for 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 the same reason that I thought the slog was a slog, he likes the slog. It's because we both like parents so much.
He also wants to be an accountant. Okay.
No accounting for taste, but
Accounting is a slog.
yeah, but he views the slog as no, this is just literarily necessary because Perrin needs to stand on his own 2 feet without the support of his wife that he has had since the beginning of him being a leader. You go back to the Shadow Rising, where he goes into the two rivers and kind of accidentally takes charge, and Fail is always standing there right beside him, you know, whispering is in his ear or sometimes shouting in his ear of, no, you need to do this or stop doing that is, and they worked through that as a young couple, but she's always been there. And now he's got to do it on his own. He's got to come up with the plans. He's got to figure out how to execute the plans. He's got to get people to follow his orders, all these things. I'm like, well, that's an interesting take. I still think it's a slog, but it's an interesting take. And yeah, I
So
can
it's,
kind of see where you're coming from there.
so it's the reverse Matt because Matt became a leader and then he met somebody who was a romantic interest. And it was like yeah, you're a leader, but basically you're a glorified bandit. You're a leader of a mercenary army.
Mm-hmm.
You need to be a leader of armies.
Mm-hmm.
And
Uh,
so
you
it's
need to
like
be
the reverse order.
legitimized.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of what he sees with Perrin through the slog so far and why he's fine with it. But not a big fan of the girls, which made me laugh because he said the hardest part about getting through Winter's Heart, I'd forgotten how much Elaine and Nynaeve there was at the beginning of Winter's Heart. And so he's grumbling. He still hasn't even made it to Matt, which remember, Matt's not in Path of Daggers because he had a building fall on him. And so he
Mhm.
wasn't doing anything interesting, as RJ said. And so he's annoyed that he still hasn't made it to Matt because the slog for him is not even Elaine. He's trying to suffer through those parts.
I thought I thought that was a slog too, but
Yeah. It it grew on me as I got older and Nynaeve became more interesting to me, but Elaine is still pretty insufferable.
yeah. Well, once you get to the kin, I was pretty done with those two. Or actually three, Avienda as well, but
Yeah. Yeah, those parts I skimmed, if not skipped, quite a bit in my rereads when I would reread the series just because those parts to me were even sloggier than the parent slog. The parent slog was annoying because of what was going on with his character because of how much I liked the character. But the the girl slog was doubly annoying because the only one I ever came to appreciate more was Nynaeve. And
Yeah.
so it it became slightly less sloggy, but you still got all the Elaine and Avienda stuff plus what's actually happening, making me go, oy vey.
Yeah, well, and that's when it really started becoming evident that it was basically poop on Aes Sedai with every other channeling society out there, which I could have two opinions at once and still be not contradicting myself. The Aes Sedai had serious hubris, but they were also should have been extremely competent.
Mm-hmm.
And so they kind of like pushed aside the competence to caricature the hubris.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right. Well, uh last thing I've got before we close is we're coming up on the last week of the NFL season and we like to talk football. So I'm gonna say that San Francisco and New England are going to end up with the number one seeds and both end up in the Super Bowl because I they seem to be the hottest going into the playoffs right now.
Hmm. I'm still big on Denver. They were my sleeper pick at the very beginning of the year, and they're number one seed right now. So obviously, I at least got pretty close in my pick.
Hmm.
Uh, I think the Texans hinges on getting the division title, which means Jacksonville has to lose this week and we have to win.
Hmm.
If that happens, we get the division title and we get at least one home game. The problem with the AFC is if you're a team like Houston or Miami or one of these southern AFC teams, San Diego, or not San Diego anymore, LA Chargers, you ultimately have to go on the road in one of these harsh conditions like Buffalo. Well, Buffalo might not be on the table this year because we're actually outseeding them right now, but New England, Pittsburgh, Baltimore, those are both on the table. One of them will be going through. The other one gets to go home after this week. Uh, Denver's a harsh place to play, especially in the winter. It's already got the thin air, and then you add the snow and the cold to it.
Hmm.
So the AFC ultimately you have to travel somewhere harsh unless you get that top seed. And obviously we're out of the running for the top seed. So hopefully we can at least get that one home game, get some momentum going into it. And hopefully one of the who are the other two teams in it? LA and Buffalo. Maybe and if we get the top seed, Jacksonville, maybe we can end up getting playing against one of them, LA or Jacksonville, later down the road for the AFC South title or something. So you can get better conditions. Actually, both of those, if we get the division, we would have the home game for the AFC title. So that would be ideal. Let the cold people beat up on each other and
Hmm.
let's get back to home by the end. That's our only hope, I think. Other than that, we'll do like we do every year. We'll maybe win the wild card game, get into a divisional, go somewhere harsh, and lose a heartbreaker.
Yeah. I just don't the that offense is too inconsistent to be like Tampa and Baltimore of the 2000s where yeah, their offense wasn't good, but it was competent enough to control the time of possession and so make those defenses even more potent and that's how they were able to win with defense both of those teams that in that era and the Texans offense is just way too inconsistent, which is
Yeah,
a
which
shame
is which is
because
sad
that
because all
defense
they
is
need
incredible.
they're a few first downs away from being good
Mm.
enough. They're
Hmm.
not a few touchdowns away from being good
Yeah.
enough. They're a few first downs away from being good. Just let that defense rest for 3-4 minutes every once in a while. And that defense is so freaking good. And our special teams is really good as well. So if our offense could be mediocre through the playoffs, we could be that Tampa team, that
Hmm.
Baltimore team, that ended up having a defense win championships. We could be, but we haven't been. We've been mediocre probably 5 games out of the 16 we've played so far on offense.
Hmm.
We were really good one game, the Baltimore game. That was it. That was it. Now, if the defense can get a score here and there, that helps. That helps a lot.
Yeah. Well, we will find out a lot this weekend as the last couple of as there's a handful of seedings yet to be decided, but the playoff picture is mostly locked in. It's just a matter of seeding. based on who wins and
Well,
who
there's
loses
there's
this
there's
week.
one on either side, AFC and NFC, that is not locked in. That's the AFC North. So Baltimore and Pittsburgh play each other,
Yep.
and the winner goes to the playoffs. The loser goes home. And what is it? Tampa and
Tampa and
Carolina
Carolina.
play,
For that
and
division. Yeah.
yeah, and the winner goes to the playoffs, and the loser goes home.
And other than that, they're like you said with Jacksonville and Houston, that's just a matter of seeding. Both of those teams are in the playoffs. It's just a matter of who's the wild
Well,
card
it's
and
a
who's the division winner.
yeah, but that's a home game thing too.
Yeah.
Because
And
if you're a
so
wild card, you're on the road no matter what.
there's
And
there's the seeding is still to be decided, but for the most part, except for those two matchups, those two divisions, AFC, NFC, the who's in is already locked in.
well,
So
and because we're locked in too, I have a feeling they're going on at the same time. If Jacksonville goes way up way early on their opponent,
mm,
Houston's going to pull their starters.
that's a
And
good point. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll find out this weekend, and before the football finding out, we'll theoretically talk some more Wheel of Time Saturday, whenever we have time.
all right. Well, we'll see you next time. Thank you for sticking around for this end of year episode. A little longer than we've been going, but I mean, it's a lot to go over.